I love platformers. They are my bread and butter for video games, and I've played plenty of platformers my entire life. Mario, Donkey Kong, Sonic, Kirby, Megamind, Shovel Knight, Crash Bandicoot, Sly Cooper, Klonoa, Jak and Daxter, Rystar, Rayman, Celeste, and many, many more. With their tight and satisfying controls, brilliant level design, and memorable characters, platformers are what made me love video games as a whole. Yet, despite having played all of them, none have ever left as much of an impact on me as Banjo-Kazooie for the Nintendo 64.
Guh-huh.
How do I write a video for my favorite platformer of all time? Considering how much of this game sticks out to me, it's a tough question to answer. I replay this game every year, completing it to 100%. All because of how much it influenced me. Hell, when I discovered YouTube, one of the first videos I watched on the website was the Flash animation Banjo-Tooie. So it's safe to say this is a game I hold near and dear to my heart, and I know I'm not alone on that. The fact that Banjo and Kazooie's reveal trailer for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has 7 million views should tell you something. But I've held off long enough. What is it about Banjo-Kazooie that has stuck with people for so long? Well, let's find out. My name is Aaron the Wolf, and this is a Banjo-Kazooie Retrospective. Before we can talk about Banjo-Kazooie, we first need to discuss Rareware and what they were up to during the mid-90s. After Rare's success with Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, they sought to make a fantasy RPG named Dream Lands of Giants, or as is more famously known as, Project Dream. Dream Land of Giants went through all sorts of different phases in its lifespan. Due to being too large of a project for an SNES cartridge, they switched development to the Nintendo 64 while also changing the setting from fantasy to pirates. Developers then tried to make the game a 2.5D platformer before eventually scrapping the game entirely. The team at Rare felt that the project was too ambitious to be completed and returned to the drawing board. However, during development, the protagonist of Project Dream was a boy named Edson before being cut and replaced with a side character they had already designed. This side character was Banjo the Bear himself. Furthermore, while this was all happening, Nintendo released Super Mario 64 in 1996. After seeing its overwhelming success, Rare knew what they wanted to do. Rare saw that 3D platformers would be the next big thing for Nintendo, so they set out to create a 3D collectathon platformer in the same vein as Mario. Banjo-Kazooie was first showcased at E3 1997, where it was admired for its rich world, textures, and lighting. The game also faced its share of criticisms, mostly claiming it was a Mario 64 ripoff, which, being released only a year after that game, was understandable at the time. Banjo-Kazooie was initially scheduled for a November 1997 release, but was delayed so the developers had more time to polish the game. That left Rare's holiday calendar barren, which Nintendo was not particularly happy about. Thankfully, Rareware was working on another kid-friendly game at the time, which came to be known as Diddy Kong Racing. What started as a follow-up to RC Pro-Aim on the Nintendo Entertainment System became a mascot kart racing game similar to Mario Kart 64, released earlier that year. And yeah, I will be talking about Diddy Kong Racing first, not only because this is officially Banjo's first video game appearance, but also, I mean, when else am I ever going to talk about this game? So with that said, let's take a look. I had Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Kart 64 when I was a kid. I played both games all the time back then. Still, even as a kid, I knew that Diddy Kong Racing was superior to Mario Kart for several reasons. Firstly, Diddy Kong Racing is a much better aging game in terms of its graphics. Mario Kart 64 used some techniques Rare themselves used in Donkey Kong Country, where the game's character sprites are based on 3D models, not only to get the game to run well, but also to give them more depth while driving. This gives Mario Kart 64 its iconic look we all know and love. That said, the actual 3D models used in the game are pretty dated, to say the least. In Diddy Kong Racing, sure, some things are sprites like the trees, balloons, and the bananas you pick up, but everything else was made as a 3D model, making it one of the more graphically impressive games for the N64 at that time. This design choice also helps DKR stand out from its older Mario Kart brother. Another area this game shines over Mario Kart 64 is the soundtrack. Donkey Kong Country composer David Wise returns for this game, bringing his signature catchy melodies for some very fun kart racing music. Again, Mario Kart 64 has some iconic music in it for sure, but this soundtrack is honestly just more memorable in every way. David Wise in particular is known for making dynamic music tracks that change as you progress through the racetracks, with Boulder Canyon being the standout in that regard. The majority of the song is this upbeat keyboard tune. But as you reach the castle gate, a flute takes over to convey a more ominous feeling. Then, as you drive through the dark, creepy sewers, a horn takes the forefront of the song, giving it a much more creepy sound. Finally, you exit the sewers and the upbeat keyboard returns as you finish the lap. Now, I'm not an expert in how music is composed or anything like that, so I could be wrong on the instruments used there, but regardless, Boulder Canyon's theme is arguably the best song in the entire game. The fact that throughout its 3 dynamic sections, it still uses the same chords for each one really shows that David Wise was one of the best video game composers of the 90s. I highly recommend watching this David Wise interview on the game for more information on the game's development, as well as the Liam Triforce video on the music of Donkey Kong Country. Both are excellent videos if you're into discussing and analyzing video game soundtracks. Now let's talk about the actual gameplay itself. Anyone who's played Mario Kart before knows the idea of what's going on. You race on a track for 3 laps collecting power-ups to use against enemy players to achieve first place. But what makes Diddy Kong Racing stand out from Mario Kart? To start, Diddy Kong Racing has 3 different vehicles for you to control: car, hovercraft, and plane. All of these vehicles have their own means of control, yet still remain similar enough so that going from one vehicle to another is as seamless as possible. Some of the courses also cannot be raced on with all 3 vehicles. Some can only be raced on with the hovercraft or plane, making the races themselves a lot more interesting. The biggest new addition to this game is the Adventure Mode campaign. DKR lets you traverse a hub world to collect golden balloons to win races, eventually fight a boss, and unlock the next area. These themed areas consist of Dino Domain, Sherbert Island, Snowflake Mountain, Dragon Forest, and Future Funland. Whenever you beat an area boss for the first time, you then have to go back and complete the Silver Coin Challenges. These challenges require you to find 8 hidden coins on each track and come in first place. After that, you fight a harder version of the world's boss. This is admittedly one of my few criticisms of Diddy Kong Racing. To get 100% in adventure mode, you will need to replay the tracks a lot. First, the regular races, second, the silver coin challenges, and one last time for the tournament trophies. Granted, I love these tracks, but having to replay them all 3 times can get pretty repetitive sometimes. Regardless, adventure mode is still something I look forward to every time I revisit the game. But what about the actual racing mechanics themselves? What makes it a more fun game than Mario Kart 64? Simply put, the rich mechanics of the races themselves. Firstly, this game has a much better drifting mechanic than Mario Kart 64, making it actually fun to turn tight corners in this game. Second, unlike in Mario Kart, where the power-ups can only be used in one specific way, DKR's different colored balloons have different power-ups inside them. Not only that, but you can also stack the power-ups 3 times, each with a different level of power. For example, getting a red balloon will give you 1 missile, getting 2 will give you a homing missile, and getting 3 will give you 10 missiles total, which you can use to barrage everything in front of you. This simple addition gives power-up usage so much more depth in this game. Instead of just simply using a power-up because you have it, now you need to consider whether or not you want to use it right away or save it for later in case you level it up to become more powerful. It's risk versus reward decision making like this that makes me love kart racing games. Games like Crash Team Racing would go on to build upon the mechanics of Diddy Kong Racing, which shows just how much impact this game had on the kart racing genre. That, however, doesn't even compare to my favorite part about this game's mechanics, and what keeps me coming back to this game: the speed boost tech. The speed boosts in this game work the same as most other kart racers, just use a boost power-up or boost panel to go faster for a brief moment. However, if you let go of the gas right before you're about to boost, you'll gain an even greater boost that's faster than anything else in the game. This tech is what truly separates the beginners from the pros, like wave dashing and melee, except more fun. Keep using this technique and you will start completely obliterating every CPU race because they'll be too far behind to catch you. The boost tech is also essential if you are to beat the final boss of the game, Wizpig.
You can't beat me.
Yeah, I'll admit, I was terrified of this goddamn pig when I was a child. His giant stature, thick eyebrows, booming laugh, and just him staring down at you with his yellow eyes. He had yellow eyes, so help me God, yellow eyes! And if that wasn't enough, David Wise's composition makes it feel like the fate of the world is in your hands, and that Wizpig is the destroyer. So yeah, you need to use the boost tech in his boss battle to beat him, as well as this other tech where if you mash the gas button instead of holding it, you'll somehow go faster than normal. So yeah, Wizpig is the ultimate test of your knowledge of this game's mechanics, and it's honestly one of the best boss fights in any racing game for that reason. The rematch in Future Funland, however, isn't quite as good. It's less about testing your knowledge of the game's mechanics, and more so if you're not ahead of him by the end of the first lap, you're probably not going to catch up in time to beat him. Also, you race him in the air, and if you bump into anything during the race, Wizpig will fly right past you and you won't be able to speed back up in time. This is what led to a lot of restarts of the boss for me. Nothing extremely difficult, but not the best design in the world. The last thing I want to mention is the battle mode, where, much like the rest of the game, Rare brings its own spin on. There are multiple different objectives in battle mode depending on the area you're in. You may be stealing dinosaur eggs and letting them hatch, collecting bananas, or just a good old-fashioned Mario Kart elimination. As much as I love this game, I feel as though Mario Kart's battle mode was better. I don't know, I just feel like the simplicity of Mario Kart's items in battle mode made it more fun. In the end though, despite my few gripes, Diddy Kong Racing is one of my favorite games on the Nintendo 64 and a contender for my favorite racing game of all time. The sheer fun brought on by its adventure mode and mechanics is what would go on to inspire games like Crash Team Racing, which came out 2 years later on the PlayStation. Simply put, I love this game, and I always will. That said, this game was only the introduction of Banjo. We're still missing the other half of this titular duo, Kazooie. And that's where we come into the true start of this franchise, Banjo-Kazooie in 1998. Oh boy. Where do I even start? Well, with the very beginning.
Guh-huh.
I honestly can't think of a better way to set the tone for this game than with this intro. It shows us exactly what type of wacky, whimsical platformer we're getting ourselves into, with its own brand of British humor, all set to Grant Kirkhope's godlike composition. Yes sir, I can't think of a better way to start a masterpiece of a game. To reiterate my statement from earlier, how do I write a video for my favorite platformer of all time? Well, let's start off with the fact that even the file select screen is memorable. The file select screen. 3 different files, each with Banjo and Kazooie doing different things in the background and reacting differently whenever you select them. I mean, come on! Modern games would be way less visually boring if they took the time to do stuff like this. Anyway, I also love how simultaneously petty yet threatening Gruntilda as a villain is. The whole plot happens because Gruntilda gets jealous of Banjo's sister Tootie for being prettier than her. Petty. So she decides to kidnap Tootie and use a contraption to make Grunty young and Tootie old. Threatening. So that's our motivation for Banjo and Kazooie to meet up with Bottles the Mole to
go on this quest.
And that leaves us with Spiral Mountain, one of the most iconic tutorial areas in all of gaming. This place has it all. It teaches the basic moves and attacks for new players, and for veterans, it has 6 hidden honeycomb pieces to upgrade your health bar right out of the gate. All the while, Grant Kirkhope's composition sets the mood perfectly for this whimsical adventure. And the flute part! Can we listen to the flute part for a second? Because holy shit! God damn, I can't get enough of it. Alright. I probably should rein in this video a little bit. So what is it about this game itself that I love so much? Well, I love the fact that the game rewards you for exploring every nook and cranny of the 9 worlds and even the hub world. There are so many things to find everywhere that the game will keep you busy for hours. Whether it's jiggies, music notes, Jinjos, or honeycomb pieces, you'll have plenty to search for in this game. Also, I like learning all the different moves as you progress through the game and using those moves to find the jiggies hidden in those respective worlds. Comparing this to Mario 64, that game only had 3 different caps you could unlock. Honestly, considering how versatile Mario's different jumps and flips are in Mario 64, you could easily beat the game without those caps at all. In Banjo-Kazooie, the moves you learn from Bottles are essential to not just finishing the game, but completing it. The Talon Trot and the Wonder Wing in particular are ones I can't imagine Banjo and Kazooie without. Also, in case it wasn't obvious enough already, this is my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. I'm dead serious. This soundtrack is filled with nothing but memorable tunes to accompany you throughout your entire adventure. I don't want to talk about the music too much because, well, we'd be here all day. That said, here are some of my favorite tracks from the OST. The main title, Spiral Mountain, Gruntilda's Lair, Treasure Trove Cove, FizzyJay Peak, Mad Monster Mansion, every version of Click Clock Wood, and the final boss theme. It's all phenomenal either way, which is what makes Grant Kirkhope my favorite video game composer of all time. Alright, so for the sake of some sort of structure, I'll just talk about each and every world in order, because this is the only way I can write my thoughts in a coherent order. A fairly solid first level for this game. It's good at teaching you some more basic mechanics of the game, as well as unlocking the most important moves of the game: Ground Pound, Talon Trot, and firing eggs. It also has some fairly memorable jiggies as well, like fighting the giant gorilla in the corner of the map, giving an orange to the small monkey, and climbing up to the top of the mountain as an ant to find what is usually for me the last jiggy of the world. This world also introduces the character of Mumbo Jumbo, who will transform you into different creatures in exchange for some Mumbo tokens. As far as the first transformation is concerned, the ant is also a pretty solid one for the first level. Overall, as good as Mumbo's Mountain is, it's pretty damn short, even for first timers. Me, I can usually blow through this place with all collectibles in about 15 minutes, which makes it one of the less impactful worlds for me. I still love it, but it's definitely a first level. But then the game cranks up to 12 with Now this is peak Banjo-Kazooie. This world is where the game really shows what it has to offer. There's so much to it. You learn the shock spring jump and the flight pad, which allows you to take off to the skies, and my god, these flying controls blow Mario 64's flying controls out of the water. I don't think there's anything that shows a major turning point in Banjo-Kazooie's design more than learning how to fly. Besides that, we've got iconic moments like finding Nipper the hermit crab and collecting the Jiggy inside its shell, filling a sentient bucket with excrement to drain water to access a secret sandcastle to solve a world floor puzzle, and helping Blubber the pirate find his missing gold so that he can spend. There's also a giant game of X marks the spot looking for the pirate's secret treasure, and finally, flying all the way to the top of the cove to find the last Jiggy on top of the lighthouse. Meanwhile, Grant Kirkhope once again kicks ass with his composition with the best goddamn beach theme my ears have ever heard. I know I'm gushing a lot about the soundtrack, but I will not apologize for it. I fucking love this game. On the total opposite side of the spectrum, Clanker's Cavern is considered a lower point for me. This dark, disgusting toilet bowl of a world doesn't nearly have as many interesting set pieces as the previous world. Sure, there's Clanker himself, who is the most terrifying thing ever to a 6-year-old, and as a kid, I could never actually free him because it required me to swim all the way down to the lock, and as someone who feared drowning in video games, that was one Jiggy I could never get as a kid. But yeah, Clanker himself is the best part about the world, since we're exploring the inside of essentially a garbage shark. Everything else around him just isn't as interesting. There was one honeycomb piece I could not find for the longest time because I did not realize that this single pipe could be entered by swimming underneath it. I mean, there was nothing indicating something was there at all. Even the music isn't anything amazing. I still know it by heart, but I acknowledge that it's one of the weaker tracks in the OST. Overall, it's probably the weakest world in the game so far. Bubble glue. I just saw. I have it typed in as Buggle Gloop Swamp. What the fuck? Bubble Gloop Swamp. Okay.
Marker and action.
Bubble Gloop Swamp is a bit better than Clanker's Cavern, but it's still not my favorite Banjo-Kazooie world. I mean, I'd at least argue that it's one of the better swamp levels in any video game, so there's that. The Jiggies themselves are mixed for me. Some are fun, like cracking the egg, defeating a gang of swamp frogs, making a giant tortoise's legs less numb. Okay, and feeding the many golden crocodiles eggs. But then it has stuff like the Tip Tup Choir, where it's just Simon, but if you get it wrong, they take a chunk of your life bar. Like, dude, what the hell? I'm trying to play your songs and you're punishing me for it. The same thing happens with Mr. Vile's challenges. This is also where Mumbo's second transformation with the crocodile comes in, and it's another solid choice, if a bit slow. But if you lose any of Mr. Vile's challenges, he attacks you. That, on top of 2 separate timed Jiggies, makes this quite the difficulty spike, giving newer players some trouble. Oh well, at least the music is pretty solid, though not necessarily the best. But then it leads to... Freezes-y damn peak. And to quote Faffel's minion for a moment, peak is right. This world is a strong contender for the best Banjo-Kazooie world of all time for several reasons. For one, the setting kicks ass. This isn't just your typical ice or snow level. No, this is a Christmas level. Whenever I think of Christmas, this place is one of the first things that comes to mind. Not only that, but nearly all of the Jiggies are designed around this setting. protecting the Twinklies from the Munchers so that they can light up the Christmas tree, dive bombing the laughing, snowball-throwing snowmen, making friends with a friendly walrus as a walrus, riding a sled down a giant snowman's scarf to make a fat-ass polar bear vomit the Jiggy, and then later do a sled race with him, once as the walrus, the second as Banjo? It's great, man. And of course, the goddamn music accompanying you perfectly puts you in the mood for some holiday cheer. Damn! Grant Kirkhope just doesn't miss! This is unquestionably the best snow-themed level in any game ever. Yeah, I said it. I have never really liked desert levels all that much. I mean, considering how much Mario alone does it, it's understandable that the setting gets stale after a while. I mean, there's only so many times you can have sand, mummies, and pyramids before it just becomes overdone. That's not to say that it can't be done well. Arbiter's Grounds from Twilight Princess is one of my favorites. Gobi's Valley is also fairly solid, if not for the signature Banjo charm. A lot of floor and wall related puzzles in here, complete with using crap eggs to give a snake a boner to collect one of the Jiggies. That's honestly as interesting as it gets here. Other than that, it's just a lot of traps, mummies, magic carpets, an abused camel, and a sphinx that sneezes. And I won't lie, Grant Kirkhope's score is part of the reason I still mostly enjoy going through some of the lesser worlds in the game. Yeah, overall, Gobi's Valley is a pretty good take on a frankly tired platformer theme. Next. Now this is what I call a spooky good time. Mad Monster Mansion may be another generic concept, but what elevates it over worlds like Gobi's Valley is just how much it embraces the Halloween spirit. Since it's the only world in the game set at night, it allows the world to stand out from everything else in the game, along with its many creepy crawlers roaming the area. Navigating a hedge maze with ghosts, sneaking up behind a giant ghost for the Jiggy it's guarding, solving a Ouija board, giving flowers to the departed, and playing music on a giant organ with a giant ghost hand, among others. You know your world is fantastic when every aspect of it is memorable, even down to the haunted cellar. And do I really need to talk about Grant Kirkhope's music again? Well, I'm going to anyway, because it's once again phenomenal. It's really no surprise that Mad Monster Mansion's music is phenomenal, since the main inspiration for this game's soundtrack was Danny Elfman's work. But more specifically for this world, Beetlejuice and the 1989 Batman film. So yeah, safe to say Grant Kirkhope knows how to make a spooky, scary soundtrack to a place like this. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that Bubble Gloop Swamp was a difficulty spike? Nah. This is a difficulty spike. These last two worlds are going to put your skills in the game to the test. Rusty Bucket Bay especially. I'm just gonna get this out of the way. The engine room is the worst point in this entire game. Between the rotating linear platforms and the deadly fan blades in your way, which can only be slowed down by a switch in a different part of the level, to the only bottomless pit in the entire game, this is that part that I always dread whenever I replay this game. And this room was even worse in the Nintendo 64 version, because if you died at this part, all of the music notes reset, and you have to collect them all over again. Yeah, there are music notes in the engine room, so you better hope you don't die here, because it's not gonna be fun going back to it. Besides that one section though, there's also the polluted water where simply swimming in it, underwater or not, will drown you. Damn, This is definitely the second to last level, alright. I will say, however, that exploring the ship itself is quite fun, especially when you're breaking windows to find different rooms to explore. It's like I said before, I love that this game rewards you for exploring every nook and cranny you can find. Everything else outside the ship can kiss my ass, especially that one Jiggy trapped behind some insta-kill rotors that can only be shut off in the engine room. Then you have to race to that spot with not a lot of time and make sure you don't go to the wrong end of the ship, because if you do... Ah! To be honest, this place and Clanker's Cavern are tied for my least favorite worlds in this game. Clanker's Cavern I simply don't remember much about, and Rusty Fuckit Bay I remember, but for very wrong reasons. It's a chore revisiting these two worlds either way. Finally, to finish this game off, Click Clock Wood. This world is hard for sure, but unlike Rusty Fuck This Bay, it's hard for all the right reasons. It's essentially one circular tall area that takes place over the 4 seasons. It also brilliantly uses yearly cause and effect for a good portion of the Jiggies. This is evident in growing the plant over the year, along with bullying Gobi one last time for some water. Then there's opening the entrance to Naughty the Beaver's cave in the summer and getting the Jiggy in the fall, hatching Eerie the Eagle in the spring, and spending both summer and fall feeding him caterpillars until he finally becomes a mighty eagle in the winter. Also, this is where you unlock the best transformation in the game via the Bumblebee. Sure, it can't attack, but it can fly around the world freely, which I think makes it the best by default in this game. That, on top of finding Nabnut's nuts and fighting the Zubbas in their hive, makes this place one of the most memorable worlds in all of Banjo-Kazooie. And that's saying a lot given this franchise. And of course, not only is Grant Kirkhope's composition wonderful as always, but the 4 different variants depending on what season you're in is what truly brings it all together for me. What a fantastic world to end the game on. But it doesn't actually end there, because we got Grunty's Furnace to tackle first, a quiz show board game that tests your knowledge of the game's characters, worlds, and music. It even has some questions regarding Grunty herself. Occasionally, in Gruntilda's lair, you'll find her goody two-shoes sister Brentilda Winky Bunyan, yes, that's her name, who will feed you 3 random facts about Gruntilda every time you find her. And trust me, you'll need to find her, because the punishment for losing Furnace is dying and having to start all over again. Now, I could see how some people would be turned off by this so late in the game, but I've always liked playing through this part. Using my knowledge of the game for many playthroughs to beat it is pretty damn satisfying. But it's not over yet, as we still have Gruntilda herself to fight in the only boss fight in the game. Yeah, this game doesn't really have bosses in it for the most part. The only Jiggy missions that can be kinda considered bosses are Conga, Nipper, and Boss Boombox from Rusty Bucket Bay. Regardless, Grunty is a prime example of a good final boss fight, having multiple phases that all require a different move or attack to complete. Also, her RNG with her fireballs is something that even speedrunners struggle with, making her one of the most consistently challenging parts of the game, even after playing it multiple times. Eventually, you'll be able to wake up the Guardian of the Jinjos, the Jinjinator, to deal the final blow and send Gruntilda tumbling down to her doom. And that was Banjo-Kazooie. Hopefully I've made some sense in expressing my love for this game. Its mechanics, worlds, characters, and the sheer fun of collecting everything in this game is what makes this my second favorite game of all time. Second, of course, to a certain Zelda game on the same console as this. I don't really know what else I can really say at this point. It's a masterpiece in my opinion. But of course, the game leaves us with one final note regarding the infamous stop and swap collectibles you can collect after completing the game 100%. What do these collectibles do? Well, you'll have to wait until Banjo-Tooie to find out. Speaking of which, unsurprisingly, Banjo-Kazooie was a smash hit on the Nintendo 64, praised for how much it not only takes inspiration from, but expands on the concepts and ideas from Super Mario 64. It also currently sits at 92 on Metacritic, which is nothing to scoff at. As such, the world immediately wanted more of Rare's beautiful bear and bird. Rare then took this opportunity to not only improve on some of the shortcomings of the first game, but also to include ideas and game modes previously scrapped from Banjo-Kazooie into Banjo-Tooie. Mainly, the addition of the multiplayer mode with several different minigames to choose from. The game was originally slated for a late 1999 release, but was delayed a year for more time to work on the game, just like its predecessor. Eventually, the game was unveiled at E3 2000 and released later that year in November. As for me, I grew up with the original game and I have since 100%ed the game at least 5 times at this point. Meanwhile, I only just played Banjo-Tooie for the first time in 2021. So it was interesting playing the sequel to one of my favorite games for the first time. So let's take a dive at how much bigger, bolder, and surprisingly darker this sequel got. This is Banjo-Tooie. It has been 2 years since the events of Banjo-Kazooie, and since Gruntilda fell to her death and was crushed by a boulder. Banjo and the gang are just having a cheeky game of late night poker when suddenly a big ass drill comes in. This machine is being driven by Gruntilda's sisters, Minghella and Blobelda, who resurrect Gruntilda from her grave. But when she awakes, they realize that Grunty's nothing more than a skeleton and needs a new body. But before that, Grunty sees Mumbo Jumbo and starts throwing balls of magic at him. She then decides to get back at the people who led to her demise 2 years ago by obliterating Banjo's house before retreating in their giant drill. Meanwhile, Banjo, Kazooie, and Mumbo manage to escape, but Bottles is dead. So it's up to Banjo, Kazooie, and even Mumbo to put a stop to Gruntilda once again. Meanwhile, Grunty and her sisters plan to use the big old blaster, aka Bob, to suck the life force out of anything it touches to give Gruntilda a new body. Now you may be asking, wait, where's Tootie in all of this? Well, as far as I'm able to tell from research, Rare hated Tootie in Banjo-Kazooie, as her only purpose was to be the motivation for Banjo and Kazooie to go on their quest in the first place. Yeah, she literally never appears in the series again after the first game. She was, and I quote, arrested by the rubbish video game character police. Wow. Talk about a character being snapped out of existence. But I'm getting off track. In terms of tone and stakes, Banjo-Tooie is much darker than that of the first game. I mean, when you start the game out killing off one of the main hero characters, you're setting the stakes pretty high. And what's just as morbid is that you meet Bottle's wife and children who have no idea what happened to them. This darker tone applies not just to the plot, but also to some of the characters as well. Worlds like Hailfire Peaks in particular are incredibly cruel to the NPCs you meet there. Even the music has taken on a much darker edge. Grant Kirkhope returns for the sequel, and he made the Spiral Mountain theme sound like all the joy and upbeat nature of it was just sucked completely dry, leaving only a shriveled, miserable husk of what once was behind. And the music that plays in the main hub world, Isle of Hags, doesn't get much happier. I mean this in a good way, but the hub world theme sounds dark and without the whimsical nature of Gruntilda's lair theme, as if to say that things have officially gotten serious in this game. Now, that's not to say the game is all doom and gloom. Far from it. The game still has the same memorable characters and witty British humor as the first game. What's even better is that a good portion of the characters you've met in Banjo-Kazooie are still present in Banjo-Tooie. Plus, even though not all of the first game's characters return, the game makes up for it by introducing a bunch of new characters to the mix. Some standout ones are Jam Jars, Bottle's brother, who now teaches you the new moves you unlock in the game, Honey Bee, who now upgrades your health once you have enough honeycomb pieces, Master Jiggy Wiggy, who will open up the next world for you with enough jiggies, and Humba Wumba, the rival of Mumbo Jumbo, who handles the transformations this time around. Oh, and of course, can't forget to mention everyone's favorite gay frog, Jolly Roger. Godspeed, you beautiful bastard! As for the soundtrack overall, while I wouldn't say is as strong as the first game, there are still a handful of tracks that I love just as much as the original game's OST. A handful of tracks that stand out include Jinjo Village, Glitter Gulch Mine, Witchy World, Mr. Patch's boss theme, Jolly Roger's Lagoon, Lord Wood Fox boss theme, and Cloud Cuckoo Land. Now, all of that is great and all, but in terms of the sequel, you're probably wondering, what makes Banjo-Tooie different from Banjo-Kazooie? Well, let's break it down a bit. Number 1, you keep every move you learned from Banjo-Kazooie, meaning that you can transition right into playing the sequel, knowing all your moves are with you. Eat your heart out, Metroid. Not to mention all of the brand new moves you learn in this game. These include spring shoes, being able to grab and climb up ledges, and way more different eggs to fire, including grenade, fire, ice, and clockwork eggs, which are very useful for grabbing collectibles, and even the ability to separate Banjo and Kazooie, who also have moves the two can only do by themselves. Safe to say, you'll have plenty of different abilities to work with in this game. Number 2, the worlds in this game are massive. Banjo-Kazooie's worlds were decently sized for the most part. Usually it took at most an hour to grab every collectible in them. At least it does for me. In Banjo-Tooie, even the very first world has so many different areas to explore, and in some cases, the worlds can even trump even Click Clock Wood's size. For those who like to collect everything in platformers, it will take you bare minimum an hour in every world to do it, making Tooie at least 3 times the length of Kazooie. And number 3, actual boss battles. As I said before, Banjo-Kazooie didn't really have bosses at all, aside from the final fight with Gruntilda. In Banjo-Tooie, every world has its own boss, complete with its own boss theme, which gives each world much more meat on its bones. Sure, most of them are pretty easy, but they make up for it with some great character design. Some of my favorites include Old King Cole, Lord Wu Fok Fok, Terry the Pterodactyl, and Minji Jongo, the robotic evil clone of Mumbo Jumbo. It's great, man. Now for some of the other changes made in this game. In Banjo-Kazooie, you collected Mumbo tokens which you would give to Mumbo to transform you into different creatures. In Banjo-Tooie, the tokens are replaced with Globos, 2 of which are in each world. Giving Humba Wumba a Globo will give you the signature transformations. Side note, these transformations for the most part are a vast improvement from the first game. In Kazooie, the transformations were only ever used for one single Jiggy, and only one of those transformations could actually attack. In Tooie, every transformation has a means of attacking and can be used for more than one Jiggy. Some of my favorites include the Stone Golem in Mayaham Temple, the Invincible Money Truck in Witchy World, the Submarine in Jolly Roger's Lagoon, and even the bee from Banjo-Kazooie makes a return in the final world, Cloud Cuckoo Land. As for Mumbo Jumbo, if you give him a Globo, he'll be able to perform certain tasks made specifically for him in each world. Finally, as previously mentioned, Banjo and Kazooie unlock the ability to separate themselves from one another, which allows them to roam the worlds freely, as well as complete missions that they can only do alone. Between that, the transformations, and the new moves Jam Jars teaches you, there are now many new ways to find and collect Jiggies. In regards to the process of 100%ing the game, for the most part, it's still just as enjoyable as it was in Banjo-Kazooie. Again, I like that the game rewards you for exploring every nook and cranny of the many worlds. That said, the completion process does come with a few caveats you need to keep in mind. To start with, there is going to be a lot of backtracking in this game. There is not one single world where you can collect everything on the first visit. There will usually be a few Jiggies that require a certain move from a different world to collect it, so just keep that in mind. In fact, some Jiggies require a shit ton of prerequisites to collect them. The absolute worst offender is this one Jiggy in Grunty Industries. A Jiggy is hiding behind a giant fan, but to get it, you have to enter behind the fan. But before you can do that, you have to stop the spinning platforms. But before you can do that, you have to defeat the boss, Weldar. But before you can fight him, you have to press the button to unlock the door. But uh-oh, you're not heavy enough. You need to go to Hubba Wumba to transform into a washing machine to be heavy enough. But uh-oh, there's a magnet that prevents you from pressing it that can only be disabled by Mumbo Jumbo. But that magnet can only be disabled for a short time. So what this means is that you have to seek Mumbo Jumbo, disable the magnet, run back to Momo's hut to switch back to Banjo, then run to Hubba Wumba's hut to transform into the wash machine, and then race all the way to the button, all in 90 seconds. Remember, this is all for one single Jiggy. God damn. That's going to be the make or break deal with some people. Banjo-Kazooie was just short enough to the point where I could consistently 100% the game in a little over 7 hours. Banjo-Tooie, on the other hand, took me 22 hours total to 100%. Sure, I am way more familiar with Banjo-Kazooie, but even when cutting out the mistakes I made in my Tooie playthrough, it would still take me 15 hours to collect everything. Plus, if I'm being honest, there are some parts of this game I straight up do not like. Do you know how Clanker's Cavern and Rusty Bucket Bay were my least favorite worlds in the original game? Well, in Tooie, those titles belong to Pterodactyl Land and Grunty Industries. Pterodactyl Land has so much empty space in it that even while using the Talon Trot, it is a chore to traverse this place. It's like if Click Clock Wood had twice the amount of space, but half the places to explore. Also, the T-Rex transformation really isn't as good as I'd hoped it'd be. Sure, it's cool to play as a T-Rex, but he's only useful for like 3 collectibles in the whole world. As for Grunty Industries, good God, man. Let's start with the fact that right out of the gate, you can't enter through the main entrance. You have to enter through the train system you unlock in Glitter Gulch Mine before the main entrance can even be opened. Secondly, this place has 5 different floors, each requiring a different method of reaching. Thirdly, the amount of backtracking and prerequisites required to get most of the Jiggies in this world can be kind of nauseating at times. I've already mentioned the Jiggy behind the fan, but having to go to different floors and even the outside area as the washing machine to wash all the bunny workers' clothes for one Jiggy is a lot to manage. And what really made it hard to get through these worlds is that both of them were back to back. Sure, Clanker's Cavern and Rusty Bucket Bay were low points, but one was in the first third of the game, while the other was in the last third. Pterodactyl Land and Grunty Industries are worlds 5 and 6. I'll be honest, playing through both of these worlds was such a chore that I honestly considered putting the game down at that point. But once I learned to be patient and realized that this game is much longer than that of the first and that it can't be rushed, it eventually got better when I reached the 7th world, Hailfire Peaks. But those 2 worlds don't even compare to what is undoubtedly the worst Jiggy in the entire series. And that Jiggy comes from the infamous Canary Mary. So you first meet Canary Mary in the 2nd world, Glitter Gulch Mine. You rescue her from a toxic prison, and later she challenges you to a race through the mines. This race requires some extreme button mashing to win, and it is not fun. Oh yeah, she makes you do this twice in the same world, by the way. Once for a Jiggy, and another for a Cheeto page. Okay, that was painful, but whatever, at least it's over now. Then the final world, Cloud Cuckoo Land, comes along, and she's back! And the rematch mission in this world. Oh my fucking god. This Jiggy requires inhumane button mashing to complete it. As in, faster than any reasonable adult, let alone child, can do. I'm not even kidding. I literally had to use a pen to button mash the shit out of the X button to beat this mission. Yeah, it was the most painful thing I have ever done in a platformer, but I somehow did it both times for Cloud Cuckoo Land. So because of that, I can easily say, screw this mission, I hate it. The last thing to mention is, remember the Stop and Swap collectibles from the first game? Yeah, they must be for something really important given how they were set up in the first game, right? So, the way that Stop and Swap was supposed to work was that once you collected the 6 different eggs and the ice key, you were to remove the Banjo-Kazooie cartridge while it was still on, then quickly insert the Banjo-Tooie cartridge for the collectibles to transfer over. However, by the time Banjo-Tooie came out on the Nintendo 64, Nintendo updated the hardware so that the intended method was an impossibility. So that sucks! However, when Kazooie and Tooie were remastered and ported to the Xbox 360, it was now possible to transfer the collectibles over to Tooie and unlock their secrets. Dear God, what could it possibly be? A brand new ninth world? A secret playable character? What is it? A cheat for homing eggs, a new move called the Breagle Bash, Jinjo as a multiplayer character, and an Xbox 360 gamer pickin' theme. Which, if you're playing these games on the Xbox Series S like I am, you can't even use. Fuck. Man, talk about a disappointing conclusion to a mystery that kids in the 90s spent years wondering about. Sure, you can get one cool unlock with the ice key. It unlocks a safe with a Mega Globo, which if you bring it to Humba Wumba in the Isle of Hags, will turn Kazooie into a freaking dragon. Admittedly, that's really cool, but it still doesn't make up for how anticlimactic this conclusion is. So, judging from my ranting, it may seem like I dislike Banjo-Tooie, and for a while, I kinda did. Keep in mind, I grew up with Banjo-Kazooie and played it multiple times over the years. Meanwhile, I had only first played Banjo-Tooie when I was barely 20 years old, so I didn't have any rose-tinted glasses to hide behind. But after completing the game 100% and dwelling on it for a bit, I can say that despite some of the issues I had with it, I still enjoyed my time with Banjo-Tooie. Even if I'll always love the original game more, Tooie is just so interesting to talk about. As you defeat Gruntilda once again, leaving her nothing more than a skull missing an eye, she ends the game by saying, "Just you wait until Banjo 3. If only Gruntilda. So from what I was able to tell from research, the line saying there was going to be a Banjo 3, at least at first, was nothing more than a joke. Since Banjo-Tooie, Rare would go on to release one last game on the Nintendo 64, the mature-rated classic Conker's Bad Fur Day. Later on, Rare would show off some of their games like Banjo, Conker, and Perfect Dark running on a Nintendo GameCube at Space World 2000. This wasn't meant to imply that new games in the series were being developed, it was solely to showcase the graphical power of the GameCube. Then, as I'm sure a lot of you know, in 2002, Rareware was purchased in its entirety by Microsoft to develop games for their first ever video game console, the Xbox. This also meant that all Nintendo games Rare was developing at the time were effectively cancelled, including a Donkey Kong racing game for the GameCube. This is where the development of the Banjo series would get incredibly messy from here on out, but we'll talk about that later. Now, a lot of people have negative feelings about this buyout, and honestly, I can't say I blame them. That said, there is some nuance and understanding one has to consider given the circumstances. Firstly, by the 6th generation of gaming, games were becoming a lot more expensive to make, and Nintendo was not willing to give Rare more capital or purchase the company completely. So, when your main publisher isn't willing to give you more money to make your games, what else could Rare even do? On Microsoft's side, it's important to note that Nintendo and PlayStation were the two giants of gaming during the late 90s. Considering how successful the PlayStation 1 was and how well the PlayStation 2 was already doing, if Microsoft wanted their console to even stand a chance, they needed to stand out. So, the best solution was to buy whatever acclaimed game studio they could get their hands on to make games for their consoles. I guess some things never change, do they? Well, that aged well. So this is being filmed on, what is it? Friday the 10th of May. And just recently, Xbox just shut down 4 different game studios. Arcane Austin, Tango Gameworks, Alpha Dog Studios, and Roundhouse Games. I know this has nothing to do, that this video has nothing to do with those studios, but it kind of makes my point look bad. The industry's so fucked. Sure, it may suck for some, but considering what was going on for both parties, this buyout makes perfect sense to me. Plus, could have been worse. They could have been bought out by Activision instead. All that being said, there was a silver lining in their agreement. Since Microsoft was not part of the handheld gaming market, Rare was still able to develop games for the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. Rare and Microsoft then struck a deal with publisher THQ to publish Rare's Game Boy Advance titles. This is where Banjo-Kazooie, Grunty's Revenge, and Banjo Pilot come in, and I thought I'd take a look at them briefly to see if they're any good. First up is Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge. Set in between Kazooie and Tooie, Gruntilda's minion Klungo is pushing the boulder that crushed Grunty when he gets the idea to build a mecha Grunty and transfers her ghost into it. The plan succeeds, and afterward, she heads to Banjo's house and kidnaps Kazooie. She then travels into the past to make sure that Banjo and Kazooie never meet, which then leads Mumbo Jumbo to say that he can send Banjo to the same time as Grunty to make sure the timeline is unaltered. Hey, wait a minute! If Gruntilda had the power to travel back in time all along, why didn't she use it literally at any time in Kazooie and especially Tooie? And the same thing applies to Mumbo as well. You're telling me instead of giving me one-trick transformations, you could have sent me back to the past to stop Gruntilda from being born? I know that this is just a handheld game, but the story raises so many questions that will never get answered, and that bothers me. But I digress. In terms of the game itself, it's a top-down collectathon platformer just like the previous games, where you traverse 5 different worlds collecting jiggies, music notes, jinjos, you know the drill.
Oh no, not the drill!
Graphically speaking, this is actually a pretty good looking game for the Game Boy Advance. It's bright and colorful, the sprites themselves look good, and it just gets the overall tone and aesthetic of the Banjo-Kazooie series quite well. The music was not composed by Grant Kirkhope this time, despite his work for Spiral Mountain being present in the game. Instead, it was composed by one Jamie Hughes, whose music and sound department credits include Star Fox Adventures, the remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day Live and Reloaded, the composer of Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise, and sound design for Nuts and Bolts, Viva Pinata, and both Kinect sports games. God damn it. As far as his composition for Grunty's Revenge is concerned, I'd say it's pretty alright. Nowhere near the timelessness of Grant Kirkhope's work, but for a handheld game in the Banjo series, it's perfectly serviceable. I know I'm not giving much opinion on the music, but when the bar has already been raised so high by just the first game, serviceable by comparison isn't as impactful. The worlds themselves also aren't much to write home about. They can all basically be boiled down to grass, beach, swamp, ship, and ice worlds. Like, yeah, we haven't seen those in Banjo before. When it comes to the actual collectathon gameplay itself, I'd say this is a solid translation to a handheld system. It rewards you for exploring every area you can, and it even has the Mumbo Jumbo transformations in it. Unlike the previous games, however, you can choose between the different transformations from every world and use them in any world. You just have to bring each world's Mumbo token to unlock them. This is honestly a great new addition to the formula, and I would have loved to see this feature return in the series at some point. Despite those positive aspects though, this is still a Game Boy Advance spin-off of a console game, so it's gonna come with its share of snags. It's very short, only taking me 5 hours to complete it 100%. The game also likes to blatantly reuse the minigames a lot. No joke, they use this same exact fishing minigame 3 different times, which kinda makes it boring after a while. Finally, the bosses are a major step down from the previous games. They're all way too damn easy with predictable patterns and only consist of repeat matches with Mecha Grunty and Klungo. Even the final boss, which is admittedly the hardest boss in the game, still mostly boils down to waiting for them to finish their attack and then you attack back. Do this 12 times and voila, you beat the game. So yeah, even though it's a solid game in the series, it's still just the obligatory handheld game. Regardless, I would have loved it as a kid, and I enjoy it well enough now. On the other hand, we have Banjo Pilot, a racing game that was originally developed to be Diddy Kong Pilot before the Microsoft purchase. There's no plot to speak of here, it's simply a racing game with the Banjo characters. Graphically speaking, it's honestly one of the better looking racing games on the Game Boy Advance. It's nothing amazing, but compared to something like Shrek Swap Kart Speedway, it's miles better. As far as the music, I mean, I commend Jamie Hughes and Robert Beelan for getting it done, but this is one of the most forgettable racing soundtracks I've ever heard. Sure, the music is fine when you're listening to it, but after you listen to it, none of it sticks. At the very least, the sound design is decent and doesn't assault your ears like Shrek Swap Kart Speedway. Anything is better than Shrek Swap Kart Speedway. As for the game itself, there's frankly not much to say. Despite it being plain racing and not karts, this is very much your typical GBA racing game. It has the same problems as games like Super Mario Kart, where all the tracks are uninteresting from a layout standpoint. It's all just incredibly flat and generic to race through, but at the very least, they're all based on worlds from Banjo-Kazooie, Tooie, and even Grunty's Revenge. Besides that, there are 4 different cups to race through, unlockable characters, and even mirrored versions of the cups, which, to be honest, I didn't even bother with. I mean, the game is perfectly serviceable, but that's all it is. I don't really have much else to say. It's the most mid Banjo-Kazooie game I've ever played. So, let's just move on with our lives. I said before that Banjo 3 was originally just a joke, but the truth was, Rare was throwing around ideas for a third entry. The first idea they came up with was a remake of the first game on the Xbox titled Banjo X. It wasn't just going to be a straight remake, however, as the characters would progressively become more self-aware that they were in a remake. The story would then drastically change from the original because of it. That would have honestly been hilarious. Given the remake climate the gaming industry is currently in, a remake that becomes self-aware and changes the story comedically would have been a great idea. Unfortunately though, that idea was scrapped. Another idea they considered was a racing game codenamed Banjo-Kazooie, where characters from Rare's library would cross over and compete in races together. But once again, it was scrapped before it got anywhere. They kept coming up with ideas, including a competitive game where Banjo and Kazooie would try to complete objectives while Gruntilda tried to stop them, but nothing was sticking. Finally, they came up with the idea to make a game with customizable vehicles, which was the idea that finally stuck, as the game was in development for 2 years until its release in 2008. We'll talk about why they chose this kind of game in just a little bit. And that is what leads us to Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Oh boy. The game starts with a brief summary of Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, because I guess Grunty's Revenge never happened, before flashing forward to 10 years later. Banjo and Kazooie are all fat and washed up, and they soon come across the sentient skull that is Gruntilda. They're about to fight when the game breaks the fourth wall and pauses in Comic Sans before a new character named Log shows up. Log wants to settle the two differences by... Wait a minute. Now then, in line with Banjo tradition, your challenge will consist of collecting as many pointless objects as possible? What? No, it's too painful to watch. Gamers today don't want all this, they just want to shoot things. But as we're broadening the demographic, I'll have to think of something original. So, let me get this straight. You made us wait 8 whole years for a new mainline console Banjo-Kazooie game, and the first thing you do is spit in our faces and tell us nobody likes collectathons anymore? Okay, so assuming you didn't just throw out the game by this point, Log makes both Banjo and Gruntilda get in vehicles and transports them to Showdown Town. So, in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, you drive around empty worlds completing missions to earn jiggies to unlock the next world. Along the way, you earn more parts for your vehicle, which can change your stats. Depending on what the mission is, you may need it to be fast, heavy, or be able to carry an objective to the finish line. This is the whole game. No, I'm dead serious. For the entirety of the game, you just drive around, completing objectives, and collecting things to move on to the next part. And this goes on for 15 hours. Yeah, I'm sorry. I genuinely gave this game the benefit of the doubt. I could even forgive the awful opening if the game was at the very least fun. But it's so fucking boring. You just drive around completing objectives that are not fun or challenging. Ironically, collecting as many pointless objects as possible. All the while, these worlds feel even more empty than Pterodactyl Land. How? How did this happen? There's a popular theory that Microsoft made them design the game this way, but Microsoft had no creative control over the final product. Rare made this game the way it is because they felt that people didn't like collectathons anymore. Considering that first-person shooters and racing games dominated the gaming market, they felt that they should make a game for a broader audience. And that perfectly sums up how I feel about this game. I don't feel any passion or inflated egos from this game. I just feel the complete apathy of a team that didn't care about making the kind of game people actually wanted, and instead just made a game that tries to please everybody, ironically pleasing nobody. Oh sure, critics liked it, but critics also give every Call of Duty game a 9 out of 10, so their opinion doesn't really mean much. And all of that sucks to say, because graphically, it's not bad at all. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of the character designs, but the graphics are great for an early Xbox 360 game. They even brought back Grant Kirkhope to compose the music, and it still sounds just as good as ever. I mean, the songs themselves are pretty forgettable, but the actual composition itself is excellent. At the end of the day, though, none of that matters. The game itself is still incredibly boring. Sure, you're generally doing the same thing in all the other games, but the difference is that the way you earn jiggies is different each time, which keeps it interesting and fun to play through. In Nuts and Bolts, it's just race here, race there, deliver this person here, deliver this person there, etc., etc. There are no surprises here. It's just doing the exact same boring missions repeated over and over again. And the vehicles themselves don't even feel that good to drive anyway. After 2 hours, I genuinely couldn't stomach it anymore. I realized very quickly that this game had almost nothing new or exciting to offer me. Regardless of how amazing Rare thought this game would be, it burned too many bridges and felt like they simply didn't care how fun the game would actually be. I don't know what else to say. This game sucks. And so, ever since Nuts and Bolts killed the franchise, there has not been a single new game since. The most that has happened in the last 16 years is that Rare released Rare Replay for the Xbox One, a collection of Rare's greatest hits that weren't Nintendo franchises, including Battletoads, Perfect Dark, Killer Instinct Gold, and of course, Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo and Kazooie themselves also made a surprise appearance in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate in 2019, which, for me as a Vavid Banjo fan, was a dream come true. Other than that, basically nothing has happened. It's been 16 years since Nuts and Bolts came out. 2 new Xbox consoles have come out since, and Rare is a shell of what it used to be. Nowadays, Rare is known for developing the multiplayer hit Sea of Thieves, which I haven't played, but I've heard good things about. As far as plans to develop a new Banjo game are concerned, the future looks pretty bleak. Developers from Rare have since come out and said they don't think the fanbase for Banjo-Kazooie even exists anymore. And that statement really pisses me off. Look, Rare, I get that in a market flooded with gritty, realistic first-person shooters, it can be tempting to try and follow the trends to make the most profits. But when you take a series well known for being a funny, cartoony platformer and try to make it a boring-ass driving game just because it's what's popular, you completely misunderstand why people liked Banjo-Kazooie to begin with. People loved Banjo-Kazooie for its characters, the writing, the fun worlds to explore, and the sheer joy of finding the next hidden collectible. That's what made Banjo-Kazooie a series worth playing. The fans for Banjo-Kazooie are still here. We haven't gone anywhere. The problem here is that you don't care anymore, Rare. You have become complacent with not trying with your games anymore. You're more interested in chasing trends than making good games, Rare. You have lost your soul. And that is just really sad. But this is a new era for you, Rare. Crash Bandicoot was dead in the water for 7 years before Activision greenlit the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane trilogy, and that game took the industry by storm. It made Crash popular again. This eventually led to a remake of Crash Team Racing with more content, a brand new platformer, Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time, and even an experimental battle royale game. Not just that, but Crash's newfound success led to the return of Spyro, Medieval, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and Cow the Kangaroo. Hell, the indie scene alone has seen great success with games like Yooka-Laylee and A Hat in Time. Ratchet & Clank reached the top 5 best-selling PlayStation 5 games list with Rift Apart. Even Nintendo came back to the formula used in Mario 64 with Super Mario Odyssey. The audience is still here, Rare. We're still here. And the only thing that isn't here, Rare, is you. This is the perfect time to come back to the series, to show that the Rare we know and love hasn't dissolved completely. I get it. It's a risk. But no great game has ever come without taking a chance. It's simply a leap of faith. Until then, my name is Aaron the Wolf, and thank you all so much for watching this very long video about a game series that I love. Stay strong and live life.